Welcome to a deep dive into something really fascinating today. We're using game theory
Hmm.
to look at why a two-party system might actually be uh, the most stable, maybe even effective form of democracy. Seems counterintuitive, right? Can math really say fewer choices are better?
Yeah, it may be less about preferring fewer choices and more about understanding how different election rules create these distinct games.
Games.
Games for parties, games for voters. We're looking at a pretty rigorous, mathematical analysis of how these political games play out and what that means for, well, for you and how
Yes.
you experience elections.
Okay, right. Let's unpack that. Game theory, it's about strategic interactions, yeah? Thinking
Exactly.
about what the other guy's going to do.
Exactly.
So tell us about Nash equilibrium. How does that fit into how political parties work? Is it about what they want to do or?
It's more what they kind of have to do, strategically speaking.
Right.
A Nash equilibrium is basically a situation where nobody, not a party, not a voter, can do better just by changing their own strategy, assuming everyone else stays put.
Ah,
So in politics, parties, voters, they're all making these strategic calculations. A two-party system makes this, well, much simpler. It's a clear binary choice. Reduces complexity for you, the voter, and often gives us more predictable outcomes.
so everyone's kind of stuck strategically.
In a sense, yeah, because any single move makes them worse off given what others are doing.
Hmm. And building on that strategic angle, there's the median voter theorem. Anthony Downs, right?
That's the one.
What does that tell us about where parties end up positioning themselves? Does it explain why maybe, policy often feels more moderate than the really loud rhetoric we sometimes hear?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In a system where the winner takes all, this theorem predicts that two main parties will sort of naturally drift towards the position of the median voter.
The one right in the middle.
Exactly. Smack in the middle ideologically. It pushes towards moderation because if you go too far out on a limb, you risk losing that essential middle ground.
Okay.
And this actually links up with ideas from behavioral economics, like choice overload.
Oh, right. Barry Schwartz. The paradox of choice.
Precisely. That and work by Iyengar and Lepper. They show that, too many options can actually lead to paralysis. People just check out.
So a two-party system kind of counters that, makes it easier to engage.
It can make it more manageable, yes. Less overwhelming for the average citizen trying to make an informed choice.
Okay, so how does this theory translate into actual elections? That gets us to Duverger's law, doesn't it?
It does. Maurice Duverger's principle. It helps explain why systems with single-member districts, where the person with the most votes wins, even if it's not a majority, why they naturally end up with two dominant parties.
How so?
Because voters think strategically. They tend to avoid what they see as wasting their vote on a third party they believe can't actually win.
Ah, the spoiler effect. You hear about that.
Exactly. Think about Ralph Nader back in 2000, or maybe Ross Perot in 92. Voters might prefer a third party, but they calculate it's better to vote for the lesser of two evils among the main contenders.
Which leads to clearer winners.
Clearer winners, yeah, and arguably more direct accountability. You know who's in charge, you know who to blame or praise.
Okay, but what about multi-party systems? On the surface, they seem great for representing diverse views, right? More options.
They do sound appealing,
Mm.
but often they bring what we might call the Vetri illusion.
Vetri illusion.
Yeah, this kind of deceptive idea that just having more parties automatically equals better governance. See, the election itself. That's just step one.
Then what?
Then you get into really complex coalition formation. It's basically a high-stakes bargaining game. And in those games, even tiny parties can suddenly get huge influence. They can hold veto power, essentially.
So small factions end up with disproportionate power.
We've definitely seen examples. Think of certain factions in Israel or Germany's Free Democrats at times. A very small share of the vote can translate into massive negotiating leverage.
Like Belgium, didn't they go ages without a proper government once?
That's a famous example, yeah. 541 days, I think. It highlights the potential for gridlock. But beyond that, it dilutes mandates. Accountability gets fuzzy.
How so?
Well, you vote for a specific party's platform. It might get watered down or traded away completely in those backroom coalition deals. It gets much harder to say who's really responsible for policy outcomes.
Okay, but two-party systems aren't perfect. Critics point to problems like, intense polarization, gerrymandering. Is game theory just saying, tough luck?
Not at all, no. Game theory actually suggests these are often distortions within the system's rules, not necessarily fundamental flaws of having just two main parties. The theory itself can model things like voter turnout or party strategy to understand how these distortions happen.
So we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can adjust the rules of the game.
Exactly. We can tweak it. Think about reforms like ranked choice voting.
RCV, right. That lets you rank candidates.
Yeah, and that directly tackles the wasted vote problem, that spoiler effect we talked about. If your first choice is eliminated, your vote goes to your next choice. It changes the strategic calculation.
What else?
Things like open primaries, runoff elections, maybe independent redistricting commissions. These can all refine the rules of the game to encourage better, maybe less polarized outcomes within that two-party structure. It's about improving the interaction.
And this isn't just academic theory. Are commentators seeing this stuff play out?
Oh, definitely. You see commentators using these concepts. John Nash over at the Financial Times used the prisoner's dilemma framework.
Another game theory classic.
Right. To describe how if democratic norms start breaking down, one party risks becoming the sucker if the other defects. And then there's Lee Drutman, who wrote Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop. He warns about fragmentation, acknowledging that while alternatives give you more ideological variety, you often lose that binary decisiveness.
The New Yorker also touched on RCV's strategic impact, didn't they?
They did, yeah. How it changes the game for parties and for you, the voter.
So bring it all together. What's the key takeaway for someone listening, for you thinking about your vote and the system?
Well, looking through the lens of game theory, a well-designed, maybe refined, two-party system offers things like clarity, direct accountability. It potentially reduces the cognitive load on voters. It seems to align with a common desire for elections that are decisive and give clear mandates.
So the goal maybe isn't just piling on more parties for the sake of it,
Perhaps not.
but designing a system, whatever its structure, that reliably produces governance that's effective and crucially accountable to the people.
Exactly. Democracy is fundamentally a kind of strategic game.
Yeah.
If you understand the rules, understand the incentives through something like game theory, it helps us all think about how to design and adjust those rules, those institutions, so they actually serve the public interest better.